Okay, so let's talk about how to graph these. So again, we know the first thing we need to do is find the y-intercept. So in order to find the y-intercept, we plug in 0 for x. So that's going to leave me with 0 over -8. So my y-intercept is going to be 0, 0. Okay, because if I have 0 at the top, then anything 0 over anything except for 0 over 0 is going to be 0. So my y-intercept is 0, 0. Now, for my x-intercept, I know I'm going to use the numerator, so I set the numerator equal to 0. So again, I have 0, 0. So I only have one x-intercept and one y-intercept, both of which are 0 in this case. So my vertical asymptote, in order to get my vertical asymptote, I'm looking at the denominator. So if I factor the denominator, okay, so my asymptotes are going to be x equals -4 and x equals 2. So let me go ahead and draw those into my graph. So I have x equals -4, and I have x equals 2. Alright, so now I need my horizontal asymptote. So I need to ask myself, is this a Dolly Parton and it's top heavy? Then I look, no. Is it a Kim Kardashian, it's nice and even? No. Or is it a J-Lo? It is indeed a J-Lo. So the degree is higher at the bottom than at the top, so this is a J-Lo function. It is bottom heavy. If it's bottom heavy, we know that the bottom cannot divide into the top. So we have a horizontal of y equals 0. Okay? So again, I was telling you guys in class that these horizontal or the vertical asymptotes are like the wall of China. You cannot get through them. And it divides the graph into different neighborhoods. So here we have 3 neighborhoods. We have this neighborhood on the left, we have a neighborhood in the middle, and we have a neighborhood on the right. And something is going to be happening in each of those neighborhoods, but the graph will live in each of those neighborhoods. But the horizontal asymptote, it's just like a fence in your backyard. It's not as serious. It helps determine the end behavior, just like it helps determine where the ends of your lot are, where the ends of your backyard are. However, there can be a gate, and you can see that there is actually a point on that horizontal asymptote. So this is a great example of a time when we are going to cross through it. Okay? You must cross through it because there's a point on it, the x and the y-intercept. So now we need to look at how we're going to graph this. So first we look on the left, and we want to know, is it going to live above the line or below the line? And we really don't know because there's no x or y-intercepts, there's no points here, so we have no idea where it's going to live. So all we need to do is pick one point. So it has to be past this -4, so let's say I plug in -5. So what I'm going to do is make a sign chart. Okay, so I have x and I have y. So I want to know, if I plug in -5, all I really care about is if when I plug in -5, if I'm going to get a positive number or a negative number. Because all I want to know, is it going to be above the line or is it going to be below the line? So I don't even really care what the exact number is. Okay, so my function is 3x, x plus 4, x minus 2. And so it's going to be easier if you use the factor form when you're plugging it in. Okay, so -5. If I plug in -5 to the top, that's going to give me a negative. If I plug in -5 plus 4, that's going to give me negative. And if I plug in -5 minus 2, that's going to give me a negative. So I end up with a negative over a positive, which is a negative. Okay, so again, I just pick one point in that neighborhood. So one point in this neighborhood is -5. And then I plug it in. It doesn't matter the exact numbers, I only care about the signs. So when I plug this in, I get a negative over a negative times a negative, which gives me a negative over a positive, which gives me a negative. So now that I know that when I plug in -5, I get a negative answer, I know that this function over here lives below the line. So I know these guys are functions, they can't live above and below the line. It lives down here, and it's going to hug the asymptote. Okay, so there's that side. Now, let's do the right neighborhood next. So let's pick 3. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 3 so I can see where this is going to live. So if I plug in 3, again, I only care about the sign. So 3 times 3 gives me a positive. 3 plus 4 gives me a positive. And 3 minus 2 gives me a positive. So therefore I know in the right neighborhood, he's going to live above the line because I got a 3. So when I plugged in 3, I got a positive number. And so since these guys are functions, since they're functions, they cannot live above and below. It's one or the other. And when I used his sign chart, I found out that he actually lives above. Okay, so now I need to figure out this middle part. Okay, so I'll tell you, it's going to look something like, kind of like a cubic. Okay, so it's going to look kind of like a cubic, but I don't really know if this part is up or this part is down or what happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in a number over here so I can see where it's going to go. So let's say I'm going to plug in -2. And again, I don't care exactly what the number is, I just care if it's positive or negative. So in my sign chart, I plug in -2, and that's going to give me a negative, a positive, and a negative, which is going to be negative over negative, so it's going to be positive. So I know at the top, when I plug in -2, over here it's positive. So when I plug in -2, I get something up here. So since it hugs asymptotes, it must be coming down like that. And now I'm going to plug in something here to see where it goes. So I'm going to plug in 1 and see what I get on my sign chart. Let's extend my page here. So if I plug in 1, 3 times 1 is a positive. 1 plus 4 is a positive. And 1 minus 2 is a negative. So my answer is a negative. So therefore, when I plug in 1, I get a negative, which means the graph comes down like that. Okay, so that will be my final picture. So again, you kind of have to use logic here. On these, I needed to use a sign chart. So my sign chart is right over here. Kind of got in my way there. Okay, so let me highlight that for you. Okay, so this was my sign chart. Those are the numbers I plugged in, and the answers I got were negative, positive, because those were all positive, and then I got a positive here, and there was one more, and I got a negative. Okay, so again, the reason I plugged those in is because I didn't know where this function went. Anytime you have a Kim Kardashian, things get a little complicated, which could be true in real life too, because we know she named her kid Northwest. I mean, come on, it's complicated. So, because we have this horizontal asymptote of y equals 0, it makes it a little complicated to figure out where the function lives. So I have to use this sign chart. And again, you don't need to do exact calculations. If you wanted to, you could, but you don't need to do all that. All you need to know is what the final sign is going to be. And once you know the sign, you know where the function lives. So just by plugging in -5, getting a negative number, I know it lives down here. Okay? Alright, so let's try one more, because I know this can be kind of confusing. So, this one, it was in your notes. We had already found the x-intercept, the y-intercept, the vertical asymptotes. And we know that this is going to be a J-lo here, so the bottom cannot divide into the top, and so it gets a little complicated. Okay, so, oh, I said back here we were talking about Kim Kardashian, but we were not. We were talking about J-lo, but they're all complicated. Alright, so going back here, the bottom can't divide in the top. So, I have this horizontal asymptote of y equals 0. Let me switch back to a pen. Alright, then I have my y-intercept of 0, 3/10, so it's going to be between 0 and 1. I have an x-intercept of 3, and then I have a vertical asymptote of 5, and one of -2. And that is it. Okay, so again, I find my intercepts, x and y, I find my asymptotes, x and y, and then I'm ready to draw my graph. So, let's look at the left neighborhood. In the left neighborhood, there's nothing to tell me if the function lives above or below the line, and so that's the case when you need a sign chart. And that's going to happen most often when you have this asymptote of y equals 0. Okay, so on those J-lo functions, when they're bottom heavy, and it can't divide into there, you're going to have to do a sign chart. So let me do something that is over here. So I'm going to do -3. So on my sign chart, if I were to plug in a negative 3, and my function is going to be x minus 3 over x minus 5, x plus 2. Okay, so that's what I'm plugging it into. It's easier to plug it into the factored form. So negative 3 minus 3 is a negative. Negative 3 minus 5 is a negative. Negative 3 plus 2 is a negative. Okay, so my final answer when I plug in negative 3 is negative, so I know that the function lives below the line. Alright, so right here. Okay, now, let's go to the right neighborhood because the middle looks like it's going to be a little bit messy. Okay, so let me just look here. So I go to this side of the neighborhood, so let's plug in 6. Okay, so 6 minus 3 is a positive. 6 minus 5 is a positive. And 6 plus 2 is a positive. Alright, he's going to live above the line over here. So on this side, above the line. Okay, the middle is going to get a little complicated. I have 3/10 and I have 3s, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen here. I don't know if it's going to go up, down, and back up. Is it going to come up like this and go back down? I don't know. So let me plug in right here negative 1. I'm going to plug in negative 1 to see if it's going to be down here and go up, or if it's going to go this way. Okay, so I'm going to plug in negative 1 to see what happens. So negative 1, I have a negative. That gives me a negative, and that gives me a positive, so my answer is positive. Okay, so if at negative 1 I have a positive, that means that it's coming up here, so it's going to go like this, and come through there. Okay, now, I don't know exactly what's going to happen now. So, let me try plugging in right here. Let's plug in a 4, and see if it's going to be above or below, and that's going to determine how this is going to go, because if it's below here, it's going to go like this, and then turn. If I get a positive, it's going to go like this and then go up. Alright, so let's plug in, we're going to plug in 4. Okay? So I plug in 4. That gives me a positive. 4 minus 5 gives me a negative. And 4 plus 2 gives me a positive. So my answer is negative. So that means it's going to go down. So that means it's going to go through here, through there, and then on down. Okay? So again, this is just kind of some review in finding the y, x, the asymptotes, and then how you actually graph it. So whenever you have the JLo functions, when they are bottom heavy, and you have this y equals 0, most times you're going to have to plug in this sign chart. But again, the exact number doesn't matter. If you want to get the exact number, that's fine. But what really only matters is the positive or negative, so you know if it's going to be up or it's going to go down. And that's really going to help you to determine the behavior of the function and what it's going to look like.